It began like any other early evening talk show, bright lights bouncing off polished studio floors, a live audience buzzing with energy, and the smooth hum of cameras gliding on tracks as the countdown began. 3, 2, 1. And the red light blinked to life. For most viewers tuning in at home, it was just another episode of witty banter, celebrity gossip, and playful teasing. But within minutes, this ordinary broadcast would erupt into one of the most talked about on-air moments in recent British television history. But before we continue, please subscribe, like, and turn on the notification bell for updates. Frank Skinner, a man whose comedic career has been defined by his sharp wit and unflinching delivery, leaned slightly forward in his chair, a half-smile playing on his lips. He had been leading the conversation down a winding path of commentary, the kind of path where you're not entirely sure where it's going, but you know you're in for something memorable. His co-hosts laughed at his earlier quips, the audience chuckled in sync, and then, in one swift moment, he dropped the line that would send shockwaves across both the entertainment industry and the royal watching world. "Prince Harry," Frank said with almost theatrical clarity, "licks Meghan Markle's ass." The words hung in the air like an electric charge. The audience froze for a heartbeat before exploding into a chaotic blend of gasps, laughter, and scattered applause. Some laughed because they couldn't believe he'd actually said it. Others shifted uncomfortably in their seats, caught between the absurdity of the statement and the implications of its crudeness. The co-host sitting closest to Frank darted a glance toward the production crew, her expression screaming the silent question, "Did we just go too far?" In that instant, the tone of the show shifted. Viewers at home would later describe it as one of those rare, unscripted moments that pierce through the polished surface of television and reveal something raw. A collision between humor, audacity, and the fragile, carefully curated image of one of the most famous couples in the world. For Frank Skinner, this was far from his first foray into controversy. Known for pushing boundaries and occasionally leaving producers sweating over live delays, he had a long history of walking the razor's edge between daring comedy and public outrage. But this particular remark was different. It wasn't a clever metaphor or a layered punchline. It was blunt, it was direct, and it went straight to the heart of the public's complicated perception of Prince Harry's relationship with Meghan Markle. To understand why this one sentence exploded across social media within seconds, you have to understand the landscape it landed in. Prince Harry and Meghan have, for years, been at the center of a storm, a swirling vortex of royal tradition, media scrutiny, public fascination, and relentless controversy. Their every move, from the moment they stepped away from official royal duties to their multi-million-dollar deals with streaming giants, has been dissected, praised, mocked, and criticized in equal measure. By the time Frank Skinner sat down in that chair on live TV, the British public, and indeed much of the world, had already formed strong opinions about the Sussexes. To some, they were victims of a rigid institution and a hostile press, bravely forging their own path. To others, they were opportunists, trading on the very royal status they had claimed to reject. Frank's remark, though crude, tapped into that ongoing debate with surgical precision. The beginning of the segment had seemed harmless enough. The conversation had meandered through celebrity news and light political jabs before landing, inevitably, on the subject of the royal family. It was an easy crowd pleaser. The monarchy is both a source of pride and a lightning rod for criticism, and in the hands of a comedian, it can be comedic gold. Frank had started with a few light observations about Harry's recent public appearances, tossing in a joke about his polo matches and another about his California glow. The audience was laughing along comfortably when he suddenly took a sharper turn. "Look, I'm all for love," Frank began. "But there's love, and then there's whatever this is." His tone shifted, his pace slowed, and everyone in the studio could feel the tension building. He leaned into the mic, his voice dropping just enough to make the moment intimate and dangerous at the same time. "Prince Harry licks Meghan Markle's ass." The shock value was undeniable. And in comedy, timing is everything. Frank knew exactly when to pause, letting the weight of the words sink in before the room erupted. That pause wasn't just for dramatic effect. It was a test. Would the audience recoil? Would they laugh? Would they gasp? As it turned out, they did all three, and that was when Frank's offhand remark transformed into a cultural flashpoint. Within minutes, clips of the exchange were circulating online. On Twitter, hashtags like #FrankSkinner and #RoyalRoast began trending. Instagram Reels replayed the moment over and over, sometimes slowed down for emphasis, sometimes remixed with exaggerated sound effects. TikTok creators stitched the clip into reaction videos, with captions ranging from, "He said what?" to, "Frank Skinner is all of us." But beyond the viral amusement, there was an undercurrent of something more serious. Some royal supporters called it outright disrespect, an unnecessary and vulgar attack on the Duke of Sussex and his wife. Others defended it as harmless humor, pointing out that public figures, especially those as globally prominent as Harry and Meghan, are fair game for satire. The debate spilled over into morning talk shows, newspaper columns, and podcasts, with pundits dissecting the ethics of humor and the boundaries of public commentary. Part of what made the moment so combustible was the fact that Frank's delivery left no ambiguity. He wasn't cloaking his criticism in clever wordplay or hiding behind metaphor. It was the kind of blunt, unfiltered jab that many people might think but never dare to say aloud, let alone on national television. And that's where the brilliance and danger of Frank Skinner's comedic style come together. He thrives on saying the unsayable, forcing both laughter and discomfort in equal measure. This wasn't just about a single line on a talk show. It was about the collision of two powerful cultural forces. The comedic tradition of speaking truth, or at least opinion, to power, and the modern royal couple whose every public move has been magnified 100-fold. Frank's comment didn't exist in a vacuum. It was the spark that lit up an already volatile discussion about the Sussexes, their choices, and the perception of Harry's role within his marriage. And here's the thing. Whether you laughed, cringed, or felt outright offended, you couldn't ignore it. That's the mark of a truly impactful moment in media. It demands a reaction. It forces you to take a side, even if that side is simply to roll your eyes and move on. By the end of the broadcast, Frank seemed unfazed by the ripple he had caused. The rest of the show carried on, but the atmosphere had shifted. Every joke that followed felt just a little more dangerous, every glance between the hosts just a little more loaded. When the credits rolled, the audience filed out still buzzing, already pulling out their phones to see how the internet was reacting. What no one could have predicted was just how far the story would travel in the hours and days that followed. By the next morning, international outlets were picking it up. American late-night hosts were replaying the clip. Australian breakfast TV was discussing the joke heard around the world. Even in Canada, a radio station dedicated an entire segment to debating whether Frank's remark was comedy gold or tabloid trash. The truth is, the line worked not just because it was shocking, but because it cut straight into the public narrative about Harry and Meghan, a narrative that's been shaped by years of interviews, memoirs, documentaries, and carefully staged photographs. Whether fair or not, the perception that Harry is fiercely devoted, perhaps even deferential, to Meghan has been fuel for both praise and ridicule. Frank's remark was a sledgehammer version of that perception, smashing subtlety in favor of outright provocation. The bigger question, though, is what moments like this say about the way we consume public discourse in the age of social media. In another era, Frank's remark might have been a watercooler conversation for a day or two, then forgotten. But now, every second of live television can be clipped, shared, and immortalized in the endless scroll of the internet. A joke isn't just a joke anymore. It's a piece of content, ready to be dissected, memed, and weaponized in the culture wars. And that's why this story matters. Because it's not really about whether Frank Skinner likes or dislikes Prince Harry. It's not even about whether you personally think the remark was funny or offensive. It's about how one unscripted moment can cut through the noise, take on a life of its own, and become a cultural touchstone in the ever-unfolding saga of the modern monarchy. By the time the clip had been viewed millions of times, dissected by every major outlet, and debated endlessly online, one thing was certain. Frank Skinner had, intentionally or not, changed the conversation. He'd reminded us that live TV still has the power to shock, to provoke, and to force us into uncomfortable but necessary discussions about where we draw the line between humor and harm. And for Prince Harry and Meghan Markle, it was yet another reminder that no matter how far they move from the palace gates, the world will never stop watching or talking. Frank Skinner is not a man who stumbled into controversy by accident. For more than 3 decades, he has been one of the most distinctive voices in British comedy. A figure whose career is built on a foundation of sharp timing, fearless honesty, and an uncanny ability to make audiences laugh at the very things they thought were off-limits. To the uninitiated, Skinner might seem like just another talk show host, another witty Brit with a knack for turning headlines into punchlines. But for those who have followed his career, his presence on that stage the night he dropped his infamous remark about Prince Harry was almost inevitable. This is a man who, time and again, has walked into sensitive territory with the swagger of someone who knows he can get away with it, or at least survive the fallout. Born Christopher Graham Collins in West Bromwich in 1957, Frank Skinner's journey to the top of British comedy was far from straightforward. He grew up in a working-class home, with parents who instilled in him a love for storytelling and a knack for seeing the humor in life's hardships. By his own account, his early years were filled with awkwardness, failed romances, and more than a few misadventures, all of which would later become fodder for his stand-up routines. What set Skinner apart in the 1990s, when he first began to dominate the UK comedy circuit, was his willingness to bear it all, not just in terms of language but in vulnerability. While other comics relied on observational humor about politics, relationships, and pop culture, Frank often turned the lens inward. He joked about his own failings, his sex life, his fears, and his mistakes, creating a kind of intimacy with his audience that made even his most outrageous statements feel grounded in authenticity. It was this raw, confessional style that propelled him from small clubs to national television. Shows like The Frank Skinner Show and his long-running partnership with David Baddiel on Fantasy Football League showcased his knack for live banter and his ability to adapt on the fly. Skinner became known for his quick comebacks, his mischievous grin, and his unshakable confidence in the face of awkward moments, qualities that served him well in the high-pressure environment of live broadcasting. By the time the 2000s rolled around, Frank was firmly entrenched in the upper echelon of British comedy. He had published best-selling memoirs, won prestigious awards, and hosted a string of successful TV and radio shows. But more importantly, he had cultivated a reputation. Frank Skinner was the guy who would say the thing you weren't supposed to say and make you laugh while doing it. That reputation wasn't without its controversies. Over the years, Skinner has been criticized for jokes that some considered tasteless or outdated. He has been accused of crossing lines, of failing to read the cultural room. Yet, for every critic, there has been a loyal legion of fans who defend him as a truth-teller, a comedian willing to risk backlash in the pursuit of genuine laughter. And it's that dynamic, the balance between offense and entertainment, that made his comment about Prince Harry so instantly recognizable as a Frank Skinner moment. This wasn't a slip of the tongue. It wasn't a nervous misstep. It was, in every sense, a calculated gamble. Say something so blunt, so undeniably provocative, that it forces people to pay attention. Those who know his comedic style understood the mechanics immediately. Skinner thrives on tension. He builds it deliberately, drawing the audience in with light banter before delivering the verbal sucker punch. In this case, the setup was deceptively casual. A few jabs about Harry's life in California, a nod to the couple's public image, and then, without missing a beat, the now famous line. To appreciate why it landed with such force, you have to look at Skinner's history with celebrity culture. He has always been fascinated by the way fame distorts reality, and he has never been shy about puncturing the egos of those in the spotlight. Royals, in particular, have been a favorite target. In previous interviews, he's spoken about the absurdity of monarchy in a modern democracy, about the strange double standard that allows the public to idolize and criticize royals in equal measure. Yet, even with that history, Skinner's attack on Harry was unusually personal. It didn't critique the institution of monarchy or poke fun at royal tradition. It zeroed in on the relationship between Harry and Meghan, framing it in a way that was deliberately unflattering, not just to Harry's public image, but to his sense of independence and agency. Some cultural commentators have suggested that this is where Skinner's genius lies. He understands that humor is most potent when it hits a nerve. And in Britain, few topics are as nerve-sensitive right now as the Sussexes. By aiming directly at Harry's perceived devotion to Meghan, and by phrasing it in language that strips away all royal dignity, Skinner guaranteed his joke would reverberate far beyond the studio walls. His critics, of course, saw it differently. To them, the remark was nothing more than vulgarity masquerading as wit, an unnecessary descent into crudeness that revealed more about Skinner's own biases than about the subjects of his joke. Some argued that it was a cheap shot, relying on shock value rather than cleverness. But even they would have to admit this. Skinner knew exactly what he was doing. His career has been built on understanding the boundaries of public discourse, and then stepping just far enough over them to provoke outrage without irreparably damaging his own brand. There's also something to be said about timing. Skinner didn't deliver his jab in the middle of a scandal or during a moment of public sympathy for Harry and Meghan. He struck when the couple's image was once again in flux, after a string of public appearances, interviews, and projects that had reignited the debate over their role in the modern royal landscape. In that sense, the joke didn't just land. It landed in fertile ground, ready to be amplified by a media environment hungry for soundbites and social media clips. For Skinner, the aftermath was familiar territory. He has weathered storms before, and he understands that in the world of comedy, the only unforgivable sin is being forgettable. Whether people laughed, groaned, or wrote angry think pieces, the fact remained. They were talking about him. And in the entertainment industry, attention, even the angry kind, is currency. Still, there is an undeniable risk in making the royal family a comedic target, especially when your commentary veers into the personal and the explicit. Britain's relationship with its monarchy is complex, and while satire has long been a part of public discourse, there is an unspoken line that many broadcasters hesitate to cross. Skinner, true to form, didn't just cross it, he trampled over it, waving as he went. That, in essence, is who Frank Skinner is. A performer who understands that the safest path is rarely the most memorable, and who has built a career on taking the dangerous one instead. Whether you see him as a fearless truth-teller or a provocateur addicted to controversy, there's no denying that his name, his style, and his audacity are inseparable. Which is why, on that night, when the cameras rolled and the conversation turned toward Prince Harry, no one who truly knows Frank Skinner should have been surprised by what happened next.